So with no further ado, please welcome Professor Michel Banlieues.
Thank you very much for this too kind introduction. And thank you for all of you for coming. Now, bear with my accent. One says in French that you don't carry the soil of your country with your shoes. It doesn't stick. It's not true for accent. Accent sticks, right? Whatever you do, they stick with you. Yes. So this afternoon, sorry, French banlieue as symptom of a block society. My point, I'm not the only one to do that, France is blocked, and Mladen would speak about that. And so I will present the context of the banlieue immigration, and Mladen will focus on what happened last July, which was terrible, terrific, and very problematic. So first I would say, you heard about moral clarity today, okay? Which is all right, it's good. You know, a university is a place of claritas, you know, the old Latin name, the light coming from the cloud, the cloud of unknowing God, and kind of enlightening everybody through knowledge. Well, it's not enough, right? Why? Because moral clarity, morals are never neutral or objective. They are biased. They carry our bias. So you need more than moral clarity. You need another type of clarity besides moral clarity. And it will be intellectual, critical clarity in order to see through the passions, like a kind of lens, if you want to go through those passions which are part of us, but which also can be problematic, especially when we are all prisoners of what has been called by Jameson the prison house of language. Each culture, each country is within a prison house of language, which is a challenge, part of creativity, but it's also a wall. So hence the necessity for this intellectual clarity of books. So people like, you can look at it after those books of critical theory, which allows you to have more than moral clarity, intellectual clarity. So you try to see through the complexity of what's happening. It's a very complex world, and the last events ongoing now are ultra complex, not easy. It's not only good versus evil, that's passion, and that's normal, but that's not enough. Because if you don't see clarity of your passion, you're going to reproduce hatred, you're going to reproduce those emotions and magnify them. So we need discernement, we say in French. And that you need the work of people who have worked for their life on critical theory, how to be better understanding. It's not enough to condemn and to react. It's fine up to a point, because you're going to end up doing the same thing to the other. You need also to see clearly. It's not easy. Religion used to help doing that up to a point, as we know. So here's a list of movies and books you may be interested in reading. They all show. So the French banlieue, when you speak about banlieue, why French suburbs? Suburbs, we'll see, it's a problematic term. It's not like the American suburb or Anglo-Saxon suburbs. We'll see the difference. Why French suburbs have been burning since the 1990s? In the country of the rights of man, the revolution, the universal, France has this claim on universalism, liberté, fraternité, égalité, which is up to a point, the Enlightenment, etc. So what's going on in your background or in your backyard, literally? So when you think about suburbs or banlieues, as we want to see, automatically you think about immigration. That is to say, the other of France, of French, the other of Europe, the other of the white European. You know, there's no Frenchness, by the way. There's a Germanness, there's no Frenchness. French is a mixture of different population, ethnics. There's not a French as such, but there's a French culture. So they attach to this French culture. Okay. So the other, and when you speak about the other, you have to look at the place, the use of this other. Space. Space is very important. And space, what is the place given by not only the nation, the people to the other, their other, but given by capital. And in this conference, which is excellent, I'm not bashing it, Bernard does an incredible job year after year, but why? And Seidon Schwartz, who's a great guy, spoke about the economy. But capital, what unifies the world is capital. Capitalism finances through its fluxes, its flows, and we're going to introduce some terms. So where's the place of the other in the global perspective of capital? This other, labor, poor. So yeah, there's no, okay, there's no blackboard. Think about space, the other, and capital. Capital is a huge machine. It's an energy machine, energizing the world, deterritorializing, taking out of territory, different culture, different people, re-territorializing country, space according to its own logic, globalization. Mexican farmers have been changed from time out of existence by capital, by the North-South. So it's very complex. So what is the place of the other? Useful worker, but it doesn't always work like that. There is also an exclusion mechanism. Like any machine, there's waste. There's waste, economical waste, products, and there's human waste. The other, which is not, cannot be inserted, which is wasted, which is outcast. So that's the problem of, and so this other, you mean the machine produce an enormous amount of violence. It's not, it develops middle class, everybody consume more or less at different levels, at different speed, but it's a violent system. It's not like, please, change your life and change your country, and whatever. It's extremely violent. And what does this violence produce? For those who have been excluded by the system, okay? They are dumped in banlieue, suburbs, in Gaza, sorry. Israel is an ultra-capital country, high-tech, very powerful, very strong. And the machine churns out leftovers, cannot be assimilated, integrated. Of course, there's emotion coming, reason, racism, security, all kinds of reasons. But look at the global picture. So this otherness is, lo and behind, put behind walls. Gaza, 2.3 million people locked behind walls. Of course, it's safety of Israel, but still, the result is the same for the people locked in those places. Banlieue locked, the ghetto in America, it's a kind of enclosed space where what cannot be assimilated, it's political, of course, is parked, okay? So the favelas in Rio de Janeiro, the res in America, the reservation, where those who lost in the great historical movement of European appropriation, capitalization of the US. What happened with Indians? They're worse than the Palestinians. So, etc. Each country has their own way of parking their waste. And I know it's a terrible word. But what do you think the youth of the banlieue erupt like that? What do you expect when they are parked in places made of concrete, which used to not be that bad? We'll see how it deteriorated. And they cannot get out. Practically no job, no education, no social services. So this violence, there's two ways. Done to the other can go two ways. Inward, you destroy yourself, self-hatred in the reservation. A lot of, although it's not, there's Indians, Native Americans who are doing things. But look at the dysfunctional, it's the same in the banlieue. Addiction, drug, psychosomatic symptom. Or what do? You project this violence outward. And imagine if the youth in the banlieue who are second or third generation immigrants, they are French citizens, but they are from Arab, Maghrebi, Black Africa origin. Imagine if they had the weapons. You think they would have, what did they do? Because they have no weapons. They burn often their school, they burn the car of their parents, they burn, they destroy. Rage, it's the rage of the machine. I don't want to go in the territory that's Merda's specialty, but Gaza, there's a rage. Of course, Hamas may be manipulated, doesn't matter. The rage is there, impotence, and Hamas has weapons. The banlieue don't have. I don't want to really say the banlieue in Paris and French cities are the same as Gaza, far from that, but there's similarities. There's topology, the same topology. So in order to understand that, you have to use geography, history, psychoanalysis. This system produces psychosis, psychotic behavior. Remember the slave revolts in the 19th century in America? Do you think it was nice? Of course, they were slaves, they were oppressed, repressed, denied in their humanity. They revolted. Madness. They would kill, rape, horrible revolt. And of course, the whites were all, oh, what happened? The barbarian, The chicken come to roost. I'm a bit simplifying there, but I'm trying to show you which direction to go. Okay? So there's a connection between Gaza, the res, the banlieue. It's not as worse as, it's not as bad as Gaza because the French is still, there's a welfare state. 50 years of social conquest, of social, the alternance tension in capital between social democracy, welfare, and pure capital, like in the US, although there's buffer. There was, the working class has hacked itself some benefits, old age, pension, housing, free education, very good healthcare system. So it's not as bad as in Gaza. Thank God, otherwise you would have, I don't know what, hell on earth. So this French system is there, but it doesn't work well. In the banlieue, we'll see why. Okay, so to go carry on, because here's what happened periodically. 1995, 2005, and Mladen will speak about what happened 2020 this summer. Periodic explodes, okay? Rage. And what is the trigger? Something which become unbearable. One of theirs, the banlieus are Maghrebi, it's a Moroccan, right? Moroccan descent. They are French citizens, right? But they have the rage, they have avoir la haine, we say in French, against a system which they think, for good reason, has abandoned them, right? And we'll see why. So they erupt, they burn it. I don't want to go in there, 260 million euros expense. They broke for, it cost the state, the French had 260 million euros, those riots, right? They happen in England, Roxbury, but the British are more pragmatic in a certain way. They happened in Holland also, anyway. So eruption. Enough is enough. We break everything, okay? So it clashes with this liberté, fraternité, égalité for the people in the suburbs who are often delinquents or deviants. 40% have no job, unemployment, right? And they do deviant things. They have to survive. They don't go to school, especially the men. The women is more interesting. It should be, there's no more. Women somehow, like Fazia, our ex-colleague, make it. Men are the more vulnerable. Sex, I don't want to say gender, sex, okay, well, sex and gender if you want, okay. They are more vulnerable, we can speak about that. So they do drugs, they survive by being dealers. There's nothing else to do, they steal. They don't succeed in high school for many different reasons. And the state, instead of pushing for, there is supposedly zone spéciale d'éducation. Do you think the teachers want to go there? They have a class full of mixed races, ethnic, and they are very, not the girls. Girls are more complacent, but the boys are defiant. It's a constant battle. So the young teachers don't want to go there. As soon as they can, they go and they're not the most experienced ones to go to high school, the normal traditional high school where there's more white than descendants of immigrants. So those boys don't learn, they reject the system, and they hang out in gangs, in those huge concrete suburbs. And that's where the problem comes. So there's deviancy. And this deviancy reinforces the negativity in the population. Oh, those Arabs. We don't let them in nightclubs. Of course, it's racist. But you know what they said to France? Oh, because they are going to provoke problems. They are going to start fights. So deviancy reinforces stigmatization, which reinforces repression. It's a vicious circle. How do you get out of that? So the French social state has turned into a garrison state for those people in the banlieue. Okay, social problems are criminalized. The least deviancy is punished. Remember where these 3 strikes you're out? 3 strikes are out. Who started it? Giuliani in New York when he was mayor of New York. 3 strikes, you go to jail. Okay, you break a window pane or and then in jail for 5-6 years. You come out of jail worse. France, 1950, 42 million people, GDP, gross national product, about $62 billion per income, individual 1,334. In 2022, look, the GDP, 2 trillion, 2 trillion, with an individual income of 40,000, 65 million population. 10% of population non-white, 7 million. Their social theories say the threshold of acceptability of otherness is 10%. I think it's it depends on what. Merda was telling me one day, Iran got millions of refugees from Afghanistan and didn't cause that many problems that I know. So it's political, it's economic, it's complex. USA, look at the difference. Okay, we have to. France is a country of immigration. Okay? 20th century, 2 world wars, colonial wars, economic crisis, capitalist crisis, 1929, 1973, and 2008, as you know, same here. There was a sudden change after 1945, the reconstruction, Marshall Plan, where the US loaned a lot of money, low interest. Why? To help Europe to rebuild, but to stop communism. The US, for good and bad reasons, were afraid that if they didn't do something, communism will use this pauperization after the war for their own gain. So the 30 Glorieuses are called the 30 glorious years, where economy boom, capitalist economy. There's a good movie you can watch, Mon Oncle, Jacques Tati, shows the old Paris and the new Paris. First wave immigration, 1920s, after First World War, Armenian, Russian, white Russian, the revolution, etc. Also Spanish Civil War, which was a rehearsal of Second World War. Hundreds of thousands of Republican, nothing to do with American Republican Spaniards left. Franco won. They went to France. They were more or less integrated. Assimilation is the big term in France. Integration, assimilation. The second wave, 45, 75 to rebuild France. Immigration of people from the ex-colonies, Maghreb, North Africa, West Africa, the Sahel, etc. The third wave, 75, 2000, globalization of migration from all over the place. But in 73, the big crisis, the oil crisis, had stopped French economy and a lot of world economy. There was a turning point. The 30 Glorieuses, the 30 years of glorious expansion, capitalist expansion, consumer society kind of started to peter out. 1990, 2020, it's the Schengen Agreement. Europe is closing its doors to immigration, restricted immigration. Yes. Okay, 20 minutes, so I'm going to, time flies. So definition of French suburbs. The word banlieue has nothing to do with Western conception of suburb. Let me show you what a suburb is in America or in North America. This is what a suburb, suburban type of life is, Montreal suburb. Here's the suburb in France, made of concrete, and they correspond to the belt of Paris. Why? It's the same in London. It's the same in many European towns. During the 19th century, during the expansion of the Industrial Revolution, the workers were put in the suburbs, outside of the world, outside of the walls of the city, the old walls. Banlieue was a place of banishment in medieval time. Bannir, banlieue, you're sent outside of the world because of your behavior or whatever, deep states, for instance, right? So this banlieue around Paris in the 50s became new cities made of concrete. We'll show you some slides. And it's where the whole working class of France was, made of descendants of immigrants, of Spaniards, Italians, Poles, who integrated, and French root, if you want. And they voted communist, they voted left. So it's called the Red Belt of Paris. And when the working class in the 70s became petit bourgeois, they bought their own little plot of land with their own pavilion, little housing, they moved out. And the French put, very logically, the new immigrants. So from communist red belt, red is synonymous in Europe of socialism, communism, you arrive to a multicultural, multiracial population. But this multiracial population, at the beginning, it was not that bad, okay? But after 73, things degenerate after the 1980s. Let's carry on. Okay. I want to speak very quickly about the wars. Capital abolishes capitalism, laissez-faire, laissez-passer, economy, freedom of, etc. Abolishes borders. Europe has no borders anymore, internal borders, okay? Free circulation of Europeans, and abolishes all wars. Lo and behold, wars are coming back. You have wars right now in Morocco. There, Morocco against Polisario. South of Algeria to stop the Sahel population who pushed by poverty and global warming are moving north. You have a war, of course, Gaza, surrounded by a wall, a huge concrete wall. There's wall, tell me, is it Bulgaria? Hungary has built a wall to stop immigration. Bulgaria and Turkey, you have walls, okay? You have a wall in the US, on the southern, walls are coming back. In south of Algeria, it's a wall of sand in Morocco, built with bulldozers, okay? So there's two kinds of Paris. There's Paris of love, Paris of tourists, which is fine. And then you have another France, another Paris. I'm focusing on Paris here because the same phenomena is repeated in most French cities, but Paris is very symbolic and it's a center of intellectual political life in France. Here's the salary, median annual income in euros. Look, you see this here, that's the X red belt. And it's in yellow, very low income. And they are occupied, sorry. They are, it's where the descendants, second and third generation of immigrants live. 40% of the youth unemployed, okay? Can you imagine a country like France has tolerated that for 30 years? Okay, I'm finishing on that. There's an exception. Pupponi was the mayor of Sarcelles. Sarcelles, a huge concrete city, was built in the 60s. Here's Sarcelles, and voilà. And it was a success, of course. It was criticized, concrete jungle. At the time, it was not that bad. There was social service, there were schools, order, security, Jews, Maghrebi, French, Black. There was a cohabitation. After 1973, especially the end of 70, it collapsed. So I will finish. Why? Disengagement of the French state. That means capital didn't want to put money in the banlieue anymore. It was reserved for more investment somewhere else. Let me go at the end. There is solution. There is solution. The Banlieues plan. Banlieues was minister, and then I finish on that. Minister of the Economy in 2007, and Macron was re-elected, of course, and he said, we are going to do something, my government, to do something for the banlieue. This festering wound in the suburbs of one of the main capital of the world, right? And the Banlieues came with a plan. It was a fantastic plan. He wanted to do special education in the city, special high school with a lot of psychological counselor and teachers, best teachers. We pay. You have to motivate teachers to go there because hard teaching is not, there's fight, there's struggle, you're constantly on the defensive. You have to be good educated. Massive social housing revamp to allow the immigrants to own their own apartment. So they also 200 digital computer campuses, special ease of transport. How do you go if you take the plane to France, Charles de Gaulle? You take the RER, or you can take the fast train. The RER takes you through the banlieue. So not enough service of trains, so they can get out of the banlieue. So there was all those measures. You know what Macron did? They were proposed in 2018. You can check it out. Banlieues plan on the computer. Macron said, "Thank you for your work. Goodbye." So that's the state disengagement from the banlieue, not respecting its obligation towards the people of France, because the banlieue youth and older people are French citizens. Thank you. Thank you, Michel.
Thank you, Michel. You will see a couple of points that I will make are actually referring or taking a different approach, but going in the same direction of what Michel was saying. Many thanks, of course, to the organizers, especially to Professor Kia, who is the spiritus movens of this all. I will like to approach the problem of banlieue immigration in France from slightly different point of view. I would be more interested in history of police and of police practices, and also in how they're intertwined with happenings in political and ideological field. And to start with, it's all happening right now. On October 5th, that was a week ago, the centrist French daily Le Monde ran an editorial saying, I quote, "For years, the crisis of political representation has tended to worsen under the dual mandate of Emmanuel Macron, French president," and then enumerated a couple of aspects of this crisis: abstention, increasingly heated contestation of the functioning of institutions, outbreak at regular intervals of revolts, such as Yellow Vest movements, and then the urban riots of the summer of this year. The editorial called them the symptoms of deep democratic malaise. There are many politicians, historians, journalists who think that all of these are the symptoms of crisis of the Fifth Republic, established by General de Gaulle in '58, and whose institutions are not any longer adapted to today's French society and politics. This we can go into detail about that, of course, but the point about all of this is that from the beginning of this year, this statement about deep crisis in political and social system of France is kind of a banality in French public discourse. Many other editorials, politicians, intellectuals, experts are formulating the same diagnosis. And what I will do is just approach for somewhat closer by one aspect of it, which are the urban riots and police violence in the last 6 months or 8 months. And then what I would like to do is give you a rundown shortly of events that constitute the context of the police violence targeting French descendants of Arabic and African immigrants, French citizens, that then are followed or precedes or follow, they're interwined, right, by urban riots and mass destructions on streets of different towns, cities in France. First, the wider political and social processes in France in their relation with political violence and French police practicing of targeting French youth of immigrant origin. Second point I will develop a little bit is about historical roots of identity checks, as they're called in France, and the position of institutional actors in France about them. And then third point I would like to develop a little bit is concerns quick survey of immigration and of perception of immigration from different political forces, something that Michel has mentioned too. So context first, by way of introduction, from the start of 2019, there was started to being established a pattern of violence, clashes between police and the population in the context of Yellow Vest movements, started in October 2018. It started as calls on social networks to demonstrate against the increase in the price of automobile fuel, resulting from the increase in domestic consumption tax on energy products that was introduced then. After a series of violent incidents, including on Champs-Élysées in Paris, the movement ended up including the demands for the improvement of the standards of living of the working and middle classes, fiscal and social justice, resignation of the President of the Republic, reinstatement of wealth tax. Several thousand people were injured among demonstrators and the police. Institutions such as UN and the Council of Europe, as well as Amnesty International, criticized inappropriate conduct of law enforcement and questioned the use of weapons, such as riot grenade launcher. Hundreds of videos attested to the indiscriminate use of force by the police, which left many people crippled. And this movement that kind of sets the background for what was to follow was then stopped by the confinement due to COVID-19 confinement in 2020. So that's the background, right? Now the first point I want to develop somewhat, it concerns the second episode of public unrest and demonstrations that were the biggest in Europe since 35 years. And that blended together with acceleration of killings and brutalization of the French youngsters of immigrant origin. That was the movements against pension reform. Political scientists, editorialists, politicians, sociologists saw it as the acme of the institutional democratic and regime crisis, and that was happening in February of this year. In April, the French rating agency lowered France rating from AA to AA-, citing political impasse in France. In March, European Council declared it was alarmed by the excessive use of force against protesters. And the UN Special Reporter of the Rights of Peaceful Assembly and Association stated that the French police must avoid any excessive use of force. The Financial Times called the Fifth Republic all-powerful presidency, the closest thing in the developed world to an elected dictator. In hindsight, the record of police violence and brutality between January and June of this year was quite appalling. If you read French, I would suggest you go to the page devoted on Wikipedia to it. What happened in Paris was that hundreds of people organized to go around and film every single contact between demonstrators and police, so that every incident is now on the Wikipedia page, is linked to a video clip. Hundreds of individuals meticulously filmed events, brutalities, watching them and especially seeing the police going wild and charging and beating motionless groups of terrified high school students are instructive, extremely disturbing sights to see. What happened then is that the police violence targeted French males between 14 and 30 of Arab and African origin, kind of blended into a situation which is worth, some aspect of it is worth stressing, I think. At that point in time, there was an intense sense of institutional dysfunction, which allowed imposing the pension reform in spite of months of massive demonstrations, the stark opposition of the unions, and the opposition was 75% of the population. The government was saved from falling by 6 votes out of 577 in National Assembly. And at the same time, hundreds of proofs of police brutality were inundating media, newspapers, while at the same time, you could see police officials, political figures of the presidential party and the Ministry of Interior avoiding the debate, denying any wrongdoing, blaming violence on demonstrators. And they were, of course, applauded by extreme right, which now has, according to the last polls, a support of 44% of French population. It has never been that high before. And nobody really sees how they coming to power in 2027 elections can be avoided. Maybe it will change, but this is how it looks right now. So that's the context in which on June 27th of this year, there was a killing of Nahel Merzouk. It's, of course, an Arabic name, Algerian descent, who was shot point blank by a police officer during a road check in Nanterre, just outside Paris. The media first reported police sources, which said that the driver refused the police check and then forged ahead toward the police officers who had to shoot him to preserve his life. And then there were videos that emerged. I'd like to show them to you.
Someone walking across this bridge at the time filmed what happened on their mobile phone, and that video tells a very different story. The car stationary, a police officer points a gun at the driver. Anger over the shooting sparked unrest overnight in Nanterre and in a number of other Paris suburbs and cities, including Bordeaux and Lyon. The French government says justice will be served and called for calm. The police officer has been placed under investigation for involuntary homicide. On a visit to Marseille, the French president said nothing justified the death of a young person.
We send all the nation's thoughts and solidarity to his family. An adolescent has been killed. It is unacceptable and inexcusable.
This is the first element, the first event. Riots, violences, demonstrations. 4 days later, on the night of July 1st in Marseille, this time around, 22-year-old, another guy, 22-year-old, Hedi, Arabic name, was leaving work without any relation to the ongoing, to the ongoing demonstrations, received an LGD shot fired by a policeman in the face from short distance. He fell to the ground. 4 police officers dragged him beside the building, beat him and left him for dead. He survived after a series of major surgeries, filed a complaint. The investigation identified the police officer who denied it, but the judge decided to indict the 4 officers and put the one who fired the LGD in pretrial detention. This enraged the police. Many refused to go to work. Although it's illegal, police in France do not have right to strike. The Director General of the National Police took a position against the provisional detention. It was approved, his remarks were approved by the Prefect of Police. The Minister of Interior expressed his confidence in both officials. And the police unions then kicked in with their old demand, which is both the demand of right and right-wing parties in France in favor of exceptional regime for the police officers who would never be put in jail, whatever they do. Just a note, it's estimated, there's no certainty about that, but it's estimated that around 50% of police officers and military in France vote for extreme right. Now, in this context, the identity check by French police is perceived as a central problem in this kind of situations because majority of teenager killings are initiated by identity check. So let's look a little bit closer into it. In France, you see historically, Michel was talking about space and the other, right? It's interesting to note that history of French police is, of course, cultural specific. Historically, controlling people who are mobile and considered foreign to a given space is a foundation of police work in France. Before the French Revolution, it was, of course, all kinds of poor wretches. But in the second half of the 19th century, foreignness was increasingly associated with nationality. And after the Second World War, one would expect that the memory of police practices which contributed to the extermination of more than 75,000 Jews in France would have permanently discredited the racial arrests, but it was not the case because of the colonial conquest and colonial policies, especially after the Algerian War of Independence, which ended in '62 when Algeria achieved independence. But in French police practices, the fight against North African terrorism kept on. And this did not only concern Algerians, but all nationals of former colonies who before independence were of French nationality. Nowadays, historians of police conclude that current ethno-racial discrimination in terms of identity checks is anchored in this post-colonial moment, because from the end of the Algerian War, the control of the North African type is a formal and normal and formal term used by French police to identify certain group of people. And especially in banlieues, this is again comes from sociological research and police historians books. Police in France has developed what historians call degradation ceremonies, in which there are various forms of immobilization and humiliation of documented French people, which means that certain people, to show they're French, they're repeatedly asked to show documents to prove it. And they have to often show their national card. At the same time, of course, nationals whose economic level and ethno-racial appearance acts as evidence. You don't, these people, including myself, don't need to be controlled or show anything. I've been living in Paris for 35 years. I've been only reading this in newspapers and seeing this on TV. So sociological studies show that today many checks are carried out on people who agents know do not come under any kind of legislation, on foreigners, or even those whose identity is clearly known to the agents. And social scientists also rightly observe that only the political aspect of this practice and its historical roots allow to understand why the identity checks are so firmly anchored in the professional daily life of the French police, while more than 90% of them do not lead to any further action by police force. So this is how things stand from point of view of police practices. Let's see institutions, if you will. On September 29, 2 weeks ago, the Council of State, which is one of the main institutions in French government, and in its most solemn formation, which is called Litigation Assembly, started examining a class action, which resembles a lot class action as you can do it, as they exist in the States. It's allowed in France since 2016. And the class action concerns 2 points: the discriminatory identity checks and the problem of police officer not wearing the personal identification number during their work. The action was initiated by 6 associations, including Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Open Society Justice Initiative. And first thing they are doing in front of Council of State is denouncing the lack of action of the state, which was already condemned for allowing facial checks by Court of Cassation in 2015. And now the existence of what's called facious check, right, has been amply documented for years by all kinds of actors. A young black person or a person of Arab origin is 20 times more likely to be stopped by the police than any other person, according to the study by the Defender of Rights, independent authority in French governmental system. These checks are, in 2016, there's a report of National Assembly. There was around 15 million per year of them, are not recorded, but they are perfectly legal. The Code of Criminal Procedure provides that whatever the behavior of the person, the police can control them if they consider that there is risk to public order. It's obviously so vague that police can control anyone anytime. It's of course a very long fight. In spite of the condemnation, like the verdict against the state in 2015, not much have changed. During the hearing 2 weeks ago in front of the State Council, the lawyer for the 6 associations said, quote, "There is a denial of the systemic nature of these controls in France. Every year, though, shows its ravages of racial discrimination when it is committed by public officials. The last two presidents of the Republic recognized the seriousness of the problem, but nothing happened. Macron, in his first mandate, first term in office, repeated that a person, French citizen of Arab or African origin, is 20 times more likely to be controlled by the police. And he said that police officers should wear body cameras, like in a manner similar to what's happening in the United States. The pushback was so strong that he never talked about that later. Since January 2014, so this is about facial checks. The second point is the identification of police officers. Since January 2014, they are all required by law to wear what's called RAO, reference of identity and organization. It's a 7-digit number inscribed in a tiny bar, but when I tell you the dimension of the bar, it's interesting. The bar is 1.5 by 0.4 inches. It's like this. The number is, of course, very difficult to read, and the Defender of Rights said in a report in 2020, it's far too small to be visible on most video records taken in immediate vicinity, which is stating the obvious. Regardless, police officers refrained from wearing it. Although in 2016 already, the Minister of the Interior back then, Bernard Cazeneuve, said this, I quote, "And the voluntary concealment of the number in contravention to the rule feeds the idea that some people fear being identified because they would act in an inappropriate manner," end quote. In law, of course, things are clear. They should be wearing it. And since the start of the pension reform movement, there were around 40 investigations for police violence events, and the officers were not able to be identified. They couldn't identify them because they didn't have the proper identification on them. The last point, I would just like to repeat a couple of, or rather refer to what Michel was saying about the difference between perception of immigration and the real immigration numbers. It's true, of course, that there's a global situation in which between 2000 to 2020, according to the UN, we went from 173 million immigrants registered in destination countries to 281 million, an increase in 72%, UN statistics in 20 years. And it's also true that immigrants in France went from 4.5 to 6.8 million, increase of 56%. But when you look at the European Union, France is getting less than 4.5% of all the requests for protection of the European Union immigrants. The reason for that, at the same time, of course, the extreme right is talking about being overwhelmed. The society is overwhelmed. We will be replaced by Muslims, and it's all over the newspapers and media. The problem is, of course, that the immigration law in France is absolutely inadapted to the situation. It's been 1 year now that Macron is trying to push for new immigration law, but he wants to do two things at the same time. He knows that France needs immigrants because of its social system that can only be sustainable if more people are working there. There's a lack of workforce in France. But at the same time, there's a pressure on the right, and he has to have the votes of the right in the parliament because his party doesn't have the absolute majority. So he has to negotiate with the right, but the right only wants to kick out everybody and not allow any immigrants to get into a legal situation, contrary to strategies that are being put in place in Germany. When somebody gets to France and tries to, and puts in the paperwork, they're left on the street after that. So they become beggars, and they become, people who are trying to survive whatever way they can. Germany was able to put in place all kinds of mechanisms where people are helped to learn language, to get professional education, to see how the country that came to is actually functioning. So that's how things are. It's a small segment of French society today, of course. I don't want to say that everything is falling down, but that's the situation as far as the subject matters of our panels are concerned. Thank you.